The 6th Annual Assembly of Planners Symposium, combined with the Pacific Risk Management Ohana, or PRIMO, was held on August 18th and 19th, 2021 at the Dusatani Guam Resort and was brought to you by the Bureau of Statistics and Plans Guam Coastal Management Program with a grant from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This two-day symposium was a hybrid conference, hosting live, in-person, and virtual attendance via Zoom. The theme of the symposium was Perseverance, Building Resilience, and Navigating the Way Forward. Day one of the symposium consisted of three main tracks: flood control, land use planning, and zero waste, and featured topics on land and natural coastal resource issues through discussions, face-to-face sharing information, developing strategies, and comprehensive planning. Opening with remarks by Governor Lulian Guerrero, the keynote address was presented by Dr. Carl Kim from the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Hawaii.
It is so wonderful to see all of you in person, and I hope you're having a good morning or afternoon or evening for those joining us virtually in different time zones. My name is Edwin Regis, and I'm the administrator of the Guam Coastal Management Program, and it is my honor to provide introductory remarks here at our now 6th Assembly of Planners Symposium and Pacific Risk Management Ohana Conference. We have a lineup of amazing speakers covering a broad range of important topics to land and natural resources issues under the concern of the Bureau of Planning. And I know the next 2 days will be filled with engaging conversations. I think the common denominator of our conference theme, which is perseverance, building resilience, and navigating the way forward, is opportunity. Opportunity to better understand our problems and the challenges, as well as understand how our different agencies can respond to those challenges and issues. We have opportunities for partnerships and opportunities for funding and for solutions. Embedded in this notion of a journey as we navigate our challenges and opportunities is this notion of a journey. So the old adage that life is not a destination but a journey holds true today, and we are very happy that you are here with us on this journey. I spoke earlier of how forums like this provide opportunities for funding, and I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the federal machinery that makes this all possible. As you know, Guam Coastal Management Program is 100% federally funded, in which we have been around since 1979. And while we draw our local authorities from statute for comprehensive sustainability planning, we also have some authority at the federal level as authorized by the Coastal Zone Management Act, which we belong to a network of 34 states and territory coastal management programs across the nation. So we are very thankful that Congress has long supported our programs, and are also thankful to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Office for Coastal Management, for administering the CZM programs through a cooperative agreement, which is paying for this event. We certainly wish the OCM family could be with us in person today, but we are thankful that they are joining us virtually. As I mentioned, we have a great 2 days lined up, and for me personally, I could not be more thrilled to be here. Certainly this event could not have been possible without support of our partners, the planning team, presenters, leadership. And speaking of leadership, at this time, I would like to acknowledge our dignitaries and special guests. And I'll start with one of my favorite leaders, our Governor of Guam. So will you help me acknowledge the Honorable Lulian Guerrero, Governor of Guam. I would also like to recognize Mayor of Agate, Kevin Susuiko. Would you help me recognize Mayor of Ordet Chalampago, Mayor Jesse Gogui? I would like to also recognize our Adjutant General, Esther Agagi. With us today from Off Island, I would like to recognize Colby Stanton, the Chair of the Pacific Risk Management Ohana and Director of Readiness for the Pacific Area Office, FEMA Region 9. I would like to recognize Rhiannon Kacharsky, Chief of Civil and Public Works Branch and Legislative Liaison, Honolulu District. This event could not have been a reality with the great GCMP team. So Steve, Audrey, Chelsea, Christian, Julian, Ray, Brandy, Julie, thanks for the great work. As well as the OCM staff, Jean Tanamoto, Tina Lee, and Maria Ayong. Thanks for everything. Now at this time, I am privileged to invite a very special individual up to the podium to kick things off. Will you help me welcome our Mistress of Ceremony, Miss Ginger Cruz.
Thanks, Edwin, and it's a real honor to be here to be part of this event today, which is going to be marking history. It's probably one of the first times that we've been able to gather in a room together and have everybody virtually on stage for a conference with masks. I'm sure a couple of years from now, we're all going to look back at this and think, wow, that was interesting. So my job here is just to make sure everything runs on time. A couple of quick administrative things. One, please make sure your cell phones are turned to vibrate. Just in case, so that we don't interrupt the conversation that we're going to be having here today. And also, if you're looking for the restrooms, they're directly outside the main doors on the right side. Just to let you know, for lunch today, we're going to be doing things kind of like they do on an aircraft. We're going to be releasing people in groups so that we don't have everybody outside at the same time getting lunch. So I'll walk you through that. But other than that, please sit back, relax, have an enjoyable conference. And first, I would like to bring to the podium somebody who's not only a dear, dear friend, but somebody who has had such an impact on the island for his entire life. Tyrone Taichin, the director of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, is somebody who is so intelligent. I think that's the one thing that everybody knows when they think of the word Ty. They think he's just the smartest person. And when the governor pulled him out of retirement to have him run the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, that was probably one of the best decisions, because he pours himself into the plans and the ideas and the future of this island and of its people. And so now, without further ado, I would like to bring up for welcoming remarks the Director of the Bureau of Statistics and Plans, Tyrone Taichin.
Thank you, Ginger, for that kind introduction. I promise not to let it go to my head. And again, welcome you all to the 6th Annual Assembly of Planners Symposium, as Ginger mentioned. This is probably the first gathering in-person gathering since COVID-19 restrictions that were imposed about a year ago, and a sign of the island's emerging recovery from COVID-19. The last great gathering, a government gathering, was the 5th Annual Assembly of Planners Symposium in February 20 of 2020. And the woman who led us through that dark period is our next speaker. As our governor, she has led us through the COVID-19 pandemic emergency with courage, compassion, perseverance, and intelligence. And certainly it is a key part as to why we are able to be in the situations community to actually even have this symposium in person here. She gave remarks at the 4th Annual Assembly of Planners Symposium within a few weeks upon taking office as governor. And she gave remarks last year at the 5th Annual Assembly of Planners Symposiums. And in her remarks, she quoted an old African proverb about saying that tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it. And as governor, she has certainly devoted her energies to meeting the challenges of today, such as COVID, but also in preparing for tomorrow. Within a few months of taking office, she implemented through executive order a coral reef resiliency strategy that to prepare Guam's coral reefs for the onslaught from climate change that are expected to increase in frequency in terms of bleaching events between now and the end of the century. She formed the Zero Waste Working Group to ensure that we can deal with the waste issues and have it contribute to sustainable Guam, and selected as her husband, the first gentleman, to chair the Zero Waste Working Group. She formed in 2019 the Governor's Climate Change Resiliency Commission, almost a sort of prescient given how climate change has reached the top of the agenda of the national government, and has created a number of opportunities to actually address that issue. She is also has directed her administration to proceed to the development, which is ongoing right now, and the creation of Guam's first territorial seashore protection plan. And also, she is on her direction, we're moving ahead with the Guam 2050 Sustainable Plan, which will update Guam's Comprehensive Development Plan law, which is the basis for all land use policies and zoning throughout the island. And this will be the first time it will have been fully updated in half a century. And also, she has created and implemented the creation of the Guam Green Growth Initiative, which has its goals to place this community on a sustainable basis and in line with the United Nations 17 principles of sustainability. She clearly has a vision for Guam that extends far beyond the horizon and that is exceeded only by her faith and belief in our community's capacity to do great things. And so with that, it is my privilege to deliver opening remarks to this Assembly for the third year in a row, our Magahaga, the Honorable Lulian Guerrero, Governor of Guam.
Thank you very much, Tyrone, and as I listen to all the things that I have done in a matter of less than 3 years, I wasn't tired. I was thinking, wow, we have a lot more to go. But I just want to say that we wouldn't be where we are today if it isn't done in a very strategic, methodical, and planning environment. In everything that we do, even in the challenges of the pandemic, I used planners, I used expertise, I used science, I used data, and most of all, I looked and surrounded ourselves with people who really know what they're doing and they're competent. And I just want to give my deepest appreciation and congratulations to Tyrone and his team and the staff of the Bureau of Statistics and Planning, and especially its Coastal Zone Management Program for all the hard work in organizing this event, despite the challenges posed by COVID and tropical storms. A special Sizu'us Ma'asi to our off-island guests, many of whom are not only attendees, but will also be presenting in this symposium. Some of the presenters are from the Army Corps of Engineers. I met earlier this week as part of our ongoing work with them. And I just want to say thank you so much for a very long-standing working relationship with the Army Corps of Engineers. We had just yesterday signed an agreement to conduct a feasibility study over in East Agana for our coastal management program and prevention that includes all of our coastal region there and also the public utilities area. And what that study is going to do is it's going to give us some recommendations on how we can further protect our coastal region. And as you know, right there on Marine Drive, we have had sinking holes there. And that's because of the waters. And so I look forward to the work that the Army Corps of Engineers is going to do to help us with that challenge. I'm also very excited that we will be entering into also an agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers to help us with our hospital and to help us with, like Rhiannon said, from cradle to grave. I know that kind of sounds a little bit morbid with healthcare, but it's true. We are on target and we are on the road to getting some really good, experienced people who have done hospital building, from planning all the way to design, to implementation, to outcome, to deliverables, to sustainability and maintenance for many, many years ahead of us. I want to again give you my thanks. And it's not just the hospital, but also flood control. And to just say that regardless of how far you have traveled to be here or are participating through Zoom, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be a part of this event. For myself, I am very pleased to speak to you once again in this symposium. I am even more pleased that you have set an aggressive agenda over the next 2 days and that your focus is not only on the problems before us, but also the solutions to these problems. Guam is at an historic crossroads. We have the ongoing challenge of COVID-19, which has threatened public health, devastated our tourist industry, and caused great dislocation in our community. The battle against COVID goes on, but we have achieved historic milestones in vaccination rates, and hospitalizations and death rates are low. We have been able to lift restrictions on crowd size, and we believe we will be able to maintain this policy with an aggressive strategy of testing, tracking, and treatment, combined with continued mask mandates and vaccination. The battle may not be entirely over yet, but I am very confident we will win. But even with these challenges, this is also a time of great opportunity to build back better using new federal grant opportunities, new technologies, and a serious effort to plan for the future instead of just letting the future happen to us. We have the power to build a Guam that is safe, a Guam that is prosperous, a Guam that's sustainable, if we are smart in the choices we make now for our island's future. Over the next few months, our administration will be conducting a major tourism repositioning and rebranding study to put Guam in the best possible position to take advantage of rebounding tourist markets. We also will be creating an agricultural master plan to build up our farming sector and aquaculture feasibility study to develop investment opportunities in that field. Beyond building up our traditional industries, we will also branch out to diversify our economy into new industries, including information technology, through the creation of a Silicon Village. We will also be conducting feasibility studies for industries in transshipment and additive manufacturing, otherwise known as 3D manufacturing. To protect the environment, our administration will be establishing the first ever, as Tyrone has said, territorial seashore protection plan. And as a consequence of our implementation of the Coral Reef Resiliency Strategy, we will soon be actively conducting restoration work for island's coral reefs to prepare resiliency against future assaults on the reefs as a consequence of climate change. Very real. We have built a sound fiscal foundation for the future by nearly wiping out the deficit, and we are moving forward again, as I had stated, to build a new hospital and make substantial investments in childcare, infrastructure, and public services. But this work is just beginning. The path ahead will require data-based decision-making on new policies and new investments. It will require creative thinking and research into the most promising alternatives so that we as a community make the smart decisions and smart investments into Guam's future. This is why the work you do, the research and discussions you have on the choices we make as a community, this is why your role as planners is so important at this crucial moment in our island's history. Of course, no one can predict the future, but we can prepare for it. We can plan for it. We can take the steps to advance all of us to our shared goals of expanded educational opportunities for our children, jobs that pay a decent livable wage, safe streets and neighborhoods, healthcare accessible to all, and improved quality of life for our people, and a community that is both prosperous and sustainable. I firmly believe that all these goals are in reach, but it will take all of us working together to achieve them. I know that as planners, you will rise to this moment and join the task of building a better Guam. Thank you again for your commitment to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Thank you for your participation today. May you all have a great 2021 Assembly of Planners Symposium. And Biba to all the planners. Si Jus Masi.
Thank you very much, Governor. And we would like to now move on to the keynote speaker. And I know the Governor was interested in hearing from him. I will note that because of COVID, unfortunately, Dr. Carl Kim is not able to physically join us on the stage, but he is able to join us virtually. And of course, we have a lot of virtual members of the audience as well online, so we're really honored to have him. He really wanted to be here, but unfortunately, there are some medical issues that prevented him, and he thought he would take the advice. Difficult times for everybody, but we'll make it through. But that doesn't diminish at all the weight and the experience of our keynote speaker. Dr. Carl Kim is a professor of urban and regional planning at the University of Hawaii at Manoa and director of the graduate program in disaster management and humanitarian assistance. He holds appointments in the Center for Korean Studies and the School of Architecture at the University of Hawaii and studies transportation, cities, and resilience. He was educated at Brown University and MIT and has a Fulbright Scholar to Korea and the Russia Far East. Previously, he served as the Chief Academic Officer overseeing tenure and promotion, as well as other programs for the Manoa campus. He is the Executive Director of the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, authorized by the U.S. Congress, to develop and deliver FEMA-certified training courses for underserved communities on natural hazards, mitigation, and urban planning. The center has trained more than 55,000 first responders, emergency managers, and leaders in over 500 communities around the world. Dr. Kim has served as chairman of the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium, and he serves on the North American Alliance for Hazards and Disaster Research Institutes and the Pacific Risk Management OHANA. He is editor-in-chief of Transportation Research Interdisciplinary Perspectives and senior editor of Transportation Research, and is currently editing a 10-volume series on disaster risk reduction and resilience. So now, virtually, I would like to introduce Dr. Carl Kim.
Good morning, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you also, Governor, for your very inspiring comments and remarks. I wish I could be there with you all in person, but as an older adult with some health issues, I've been advised to stay put for now, so I have to do this virtually. Blame COVID. I wish so much that I could be with you there in person. So I want to begin by thanking the Guam Assembly of Planners and Edwin and the Primo leadership and many others we've worked with over the years for inviting me to present to you all. I think this is a really important topic. And if I can, I would like to share my screen. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. As Ginger mentioned, I work for the University of Hawaii. I've been a planning professor for more than 37 years. And I direct a national center That's part of the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium that's funded by FEMA and U.S. Department of Homeland Security. I think I want to begin with your standard disclosure. My comments today, don't reflect any official positions or guidance. And really, I'm speaking to the planning community here. As I mentioned, I've been a planning professor for many years, and we've trained many planners from Guam. And I hope that we can continue to do that. And I think we have a very special relationship with the planners in Guam and Hawaii. And I hope that we can continue to collaborate in these challenging times. And so this morning, what I really wanted to do was, in addition to connecting science and engineering and social science and planning, I did want to also say some things about COVID and our planning and response to disasters. But really the focus of what I want to talk about this morning is how we mainstream resilience into comprehensive planning, functional planning, and community plans. As before, I study cities and development and safety and with a big focus on transportation. I was editor for many years of accident analysis and prevention, which focuses on not just automobile accidents, which still remain one of the leading ways that people are killed and hurt, but also large industrial accidents. And so that's kind of what I've been known for. Hawaiian Airlines magazine did a profile on me a few years ago where they called me Dr. Disaster, and that nickname has sort of lasted because I've been studying low probability, high consequence events, and these are kind of complex phenomena that involve interactions between human, vehicle, roadway, environmental systems. And what I want to argue today is that many of the same precautionary actions that we take, the protective actions that we take, wearing seatbelts, they're also related to how we think about seawalls or reducing our travel to reduce our risk, and other types of protective actions like face masks and vaccines. And a big part of that is how we integrate information technologies into the management of risk. So the main work that I'm doing these days is working as the director of the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, which is authorized by Congress, funded by FEMA, with a big focus on not just natural hazards and coastal communities, but also islands. And we look at both response and recovery. And a lot of what we're trying to do is to focus on those hazards and threats that we have in the region, and then learning from them and applying them for this national work that we do. We're part of the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium, which includes Texas A&M, LSU, New Mexico Tech, several other federal partners as well too. And I think that they represent a real asset in terms of training and capacity building. But before I talk more about the work, the training that we're doing, I want to take us back to the COVID issue, because I think we've all had to rethink things or pivot because of COVID-19. One of the things for sure is that it reminds us of the centrality of transportation. I mean, the disease was spread by the movements of people. And moreover, before the vaccine, before the treatments, the only way that we could actually control it to mitigate harm was by isolation, quarantine, social distancing. So transportation was really central to not just the spread of it, but also to the management of this. And so part of what we've been having to do is to re-engineer a lot of the work that we've been studying about accessibility, mobility, congestion and safety, and then to really focus on how we can use these same tools to help in the response and recovery. And of course, there are lots of challenges with the data, with the technologies, with using it. And but I think one of the positive things is this notion that that green, active, outdoor activity is a good thing. And so as we go forward, I think that there are some opportunities to be greener and more active as a way of thinking about managing this. So a large part of what we've been doing over the last 16, 17 months is taking some of our existing technologies and then how can they be reused to support these non-pharmaceutical interventions? How can we use the same sorts of warning systems, detection systems? How can we think about information management in a way to support these activities? One of the large, if we didn't have COVID, one of our major projects involves using machine learning applications to understand wave heights, coastal inundation, flooding. And we're trying to integrate drones and surveying techniques to monitor what's happening on the coastlines. And so what I'm showing here are some of the algorithms that we've been working on to develop to capture changes in the physical environment and then relate that to the coastal hazards, the flooding, the threat of sea level rise and other types of challenges. And a big part of our focus has been how can we use this in terms of many of the planning ideas about designing with nature, promoting more natural processes rather than simply building seawalls or physical structures. Can we look at deeper setbacks? Can we look at other ways of managing the interactions between the built and natural environments? So a lot of the work that we've been doing is taking the same tools and methods and then reorienting them for this COVID pandemic disaster. So we've been developing applications to detect whether people are masked or not, whether they're maintaining social distances in crowds. And a lot of this involves some challenges with the technology in terms of capturing whether or not people are masked. As you can imagine, there are also huge challenges with regard to privacy, with regard to capturing personal information. And I think the technology is one side of it, but the other side of it is how do we manage the information and many of those challenges. It's really clear that new technologies in terms of mobile sensors, mobile communication networks really offer opportunities for managing risk and different types of hazards and threats. Our lab, the Pacific Urban Resilience Lab, has been involved in the development of different types of apps for tracking and tracing and identifying different at-risk groups. And then one of the challenges, of course, has been who has access to this information, what happens to it after the pandemic. And there are many, many sorts of challenges that really relate not so much to the technology, which was easy enough to figure out, but really the management, the ownership, and the governance of this. And so part of our strategy has been saying, well, how can we focus on useful information? Can we use these technologies to track the movements of people and the disease on the one hand? But then the other is to really identify vulnerable populations, at-risk populations. So we've been mapping the locations of care homes and vulnerable populations, and then trying to ensure that there's a whole range of protective actions that are taken so that high-risk individuals are protected in this. As was mentioned before, we have also real challenges. In Hawaii, we are so dependent on the visitor industry, and we have many challenges in terms of reopening the economy and tourism. It's kind of like a quasi-experimental design in that we can look at the impacts of what happens when we close the economy and then reopen it, and then how we can adjust to these sorts of changes over time. So part of the research that we're conducting is how to measure the effects of these different types of strategies and interventions. And I think in addition to testing and good contact tracing, but also tracking of people that may not necessarily be sick, but could potentially be carriers, or could be these are really important to understand, both the technology and then how we implement it, how we train individuals to be able to use this effectively. And again, a big emphasis that we've been focusing on in Hawaii has been to look at hospital capacity, and that we don't really want to be to have it as an island setting overwhelmed. And then really also looking at the characteristics of elderly and children, and then the characteristics of who's most likely to spread the disease. And so one of my good friends who headed the Ebola response in Africa reminded me that the best way to fight the pandemic is like it's a wildfire. And that is, think really about the sources of the spread, and then to put out the flame and throw everything that we have at it. And it's not just one thing, but really multiple strategies that need to be applied. I moved to Hawaii the same year that Mauna Loa started erupting and was threatening Hilo. And I remember on the one hand how scary that was, but at the same time too, it was kind of fascinating at a couple levels. How do people live and accommodate living with risk and hazards? This is from the more recent eruption where the volcano overtook a solid waste transfer facility. This is also part of the reason why we developed a drone class to assist with the damage assessment and so forth. And so part of our research involves thinking about how do we adapt to hazards and threats? How do we live with risk, and how do we build that into our planning and adaptation strategies? And a big part of what we try to do is to integrate that with training and education and the work of the university. I mean, if you're looking for a simple definition of planning, it really is about the connection between knowledge and action. And when we think about it, the theories about what planning should do is it includes widening choice and coming up with more alternatives, and then evaluating these sorts of outcomes and really trying to improve the quality of life, improve conditions in society. And so this is really about governance, but ultimately it is about managing uncertainty. Here's a slide which does a whole semester of planning theory. I use Karen Christensen's Coping with Uncertainty in Planning. It's a classic article. When we think about planning, it's not just multidisciplinary and multi-scalar. It really involves this notion of agreement between ends and goals and means. And there can be agreement over the goals or the ends, and then the means or the technologies for achieving them can be either known or unknown. If there's agreement between the means and the ends, it's kind of a programming activity. On the other side of it, if there's disagreement over what the goals are and the means are unknown, we're in chaos, and we want to try to avoid chaos. Also, if there's agreement over the goals, but we're not sure of the means, maybe we can do some experimentation. A lot of times, increasingly, there's disagreement over ends and goals. And there are known techniques for achieving those ends and goals. And so there's much more bargaining, negotiation, facilitation. And so these are the important modalities of planning. Separate from that, there are these other things, these other processes that are happening. And one of the most pronounced is urbanization. And with it, motorization. And that's what I studied. And I remember seeing this image of one of the fastest rates of motorization in the world, actually, has been Guam. And so much of planning, so much of what we do involves managing the automobile and the secondary impacts associated with that. It's really interesting with the COVID pandemic disaster, transportation was used as an asset for response. The vehicles, the parking, other assets were used as a way of creating barriers, actually, to prevent the spread of disease. This drive-through testing, drive-through vaccination. This was a way of protecting screeners and also those getting tested. And I think what's really important is to go the next step to integrate smartphones and how we can share public health data, to integrate that into also sheltering as well too, because motor vehicles can provide shelter. And so part of this is how do we integrate this into our recovery planning efforts and other types of challenges that are associated with that. Yeah, my daughter works in Korea, and so she and my brother-in-law recently returned back to Korea from Hawaii. And even though they were both vaccinated, they were required to quarantine for actually 12 days now. Before it was 14 days. And it's monitored by the cell phone, and violations of these quarantine orders are punishable by really significant fines. But the other thing that was interesting is that in addition to these strict laws, a huge box containing all these different supplies arrived at their home, so that it made it easier to quarantine, to do this. And it contained food and water and cleaning supplies and other types of goodies to support this notion of sheltering. And so, and what's interesting about this is that my daughter was telling me she got a call 2 days after, and they reminded her, it's very important to take a shower every day, to change your clothes every day, even though you're staying indoor, because we're concerned about your mental health. And I think there's a lot more that we can be doing to help people that have quarantine and to avoid this sort of disaster. But a key part of our research involves thinking about the roadways, access, and mobility. Without roads, there's very limited opportunity for development. And we know that other infrastructure tends to follow the roadways. Emergency support function number one is transportation. I mean, it's absolutely critical to EMS, fire, police, public works response. And this pandemic also reminded us of the important challenges of freight, commerce, and supply chains, especially for islands. And so part of this is thinking about the connection between the ports, the airports, the transportation hubs, and our distribution networks, both for disasters as well as for ongoing threats and hazards, day-to-day commerce and economic activity. Islands are especially vulnerable. I was reminded by the Japanese, the Fukushima disaster, another one of the cases I've studied a lot. And what's interesting about this was that the Japanese had taken many, many prudent actions. They had big seawalls, deep setbacks, backup generation, elevated sites. They had planned for this event, but the tsunami the earthquake-generated tsunami overwhelmed this capacity. And created really long-term challenges with recovery and remediation. And my wife was not real happy about me going there and taking pictures of this cleanup operation where they're scraping these contaminated vegetation and soil and then bagging it and then storing it in 88,000 different temporary storage facilities across the impacted area. And there are ongoing concerns. I mean, just recently, the Japanese government has announced that they plan to release contaminated radioactive wastewater into the ocean. And this is going to have longer term impacts on environment, health, and safety. And there are many, many other countries that are dependent on nuclear power. It is an alternative to fossil fuel and greenhouse gas emissions. But again, many of these are outdated, antiquated, dangerous technologies. And this again shows the inadequate safety, regulatory, and environmental protections and the problems when you have human error, complex systems, and then also people that are bad and dangerous. And we do have to worry about the weaponization of infrastructure and technology. We live in a globally connected world where new technologies are really driving the way that things operate. And so to kind of focus on this, where should we go with this? And I would say we got to take a step backwards, that we want to design with nature, that we really want to be thinking about future generations and making the connections between resilience and sustainability. One of the projects that I've also been involved in was the Cheonggyecheon project in Korea, where they took an elevated highway and then replaced it with this large drainage green space in the center of Seoul. When this was done, this was really a first generation attempt at this. I think there were a lot of mistakes that were made in terms of building this system, but I think the core idea and the initiatives were really useful. And I think that there are lessons that we can learn from this idea of creating these multi-purpose spaces. And it is really about good planning, design, and engineering. So we have a number of courses that we teach at the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center. Next week, we're piloting our course on mitigating land use, mitigating hazards with land use planning. The target is planners and emergency managers. We're always looking for people to give feedback in on these pilots as well too. And again, if you're free and you're interested in this, I hope that you can join us for that. We have a whole series of coastal hazards courses that are at the awareness level. Some are more related to tools that involve different data sources. And we work very closely with NOAA and many, many other partnerships. We also have a coastal hazards course that's in development as well too. A lot of the work that we have focused on is on recovery planning because it is among the most challenging to do recovery. We've done work in not just Hawaii, but also in Puerto Rico and other communities around the world. And again, I think learning from the recovery from disasters provides us with real good information as to how to implement this sort of knowledge to action. So I think I want to close by once again thanking you for this opportunity to talk about the different hazards and threats that come from both nature and technology. I think one of the biggest that we may have is complacency fueled by ignorance, incompetence. I think it's challenging with politics because, again, we have information getting weaponized and politics is a blood sport. But I think that there are also very important human values that we have to think about, greed and racism, evil that haven't gone away. But with planning, I think we do have to recognize the power of being positive, of thinking about the future, of being hopeful, and working with all groups. So in conclusion, I think there are 5 things we can do. The first is ramp up our ongoing training and educational activities. And I think it's timely now because we can do more of it online through virtual engagements, but that's no substitute for face-to-face engagements. We need robust, continued partnerships with NOAA, FEMA, USGS, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, USAID, so many others that are involved and that we can work together. We need to have continued investment in research and development and technologies and data and modeling. And together, I think we can manage uncertainty and risk, but really with a big focus on the vulnerable, at-risk, underserved populations. And let's go green. Let's really think about nature-based systems and transform systems of planning, land use, and development to support all of us. And so with that, I'd like to close and thank you all for this opportunity. And I hope that we can meet up in person sooner rather than later. I do have this ticket that I hope that they'll allow me to reuse. And so hopefully I will be able to get to Guam sooner rather than later. If not, we hope to see you in Hawaii and with the next Primo meeting. So once again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carl Kim, and thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation, and the luxury of having technology at our disposal, you'll be able to see that. So for the folks that missed it, it will be online on the Bureau of Statistics and Plans website, and you'll be able to enjoy some of that wisdom that was imparted today.
Up next, Session 1 on flooding, facilitated by Evangeline Lujan, Senior Regulatory Analyst of the Guam Waterworks Authority. This session will focus on presenting the findings related to the investigation of various flooding issues being addressed by the Guam Silver Jackets Flood Policy Working Group. It will examine the physical, regulatory, and policy root causes of problems related to flood prevention as well as flood solutions.
Now, I'd like to introduce somebody who is no stranger to the folks over at the Bureau of Planning. She used to be there with the Guam Coastal Management Program. I'd like to ask Captain Brian Bearden, Senator Sabina Flores, Vince Ariola, Randy Romero, and Leo Espia to come up to the stage. And while they're coming up, I'd like to introduce the chair of our Session 1, which is going to deal with the topic of flooding, something that is life-threatening in some instances, and really a key to Guam's future in managing that with all of the rain that we get on this island. Vanji Lujan is a senior regulatory analyst with the Guam Waterworks Authority. Her primary responsibility there is to ensure the compliance environmental regulations related to safe and clean water are followed. Vanji has been appointed as the chair for the governor of Guam's Climate Change and Resiliency Commission, and she is the co-chair of the governor's Guam Green Growth Initiative. Vanji is also appointed by the governor as the focal point for the Micronesia Challenge for Guam. She started her career in government services as a Geographic Information System Manager, GIS. And she was at the Bureau of Statistics and Plans when she did that, and she was also administrator for the Guam Coastal Management Program. So I'd like to welcome to the microphone, Vanji Lujan.
Thank you so much, Ginger. We used to work together at BSP, and she developed a video on GIS when GIS was just hardly started. And so we got a chance to work a lot together. And she also wrote the book on wetlands for Guam. And so the wetland poster that you see is from her book. So we were very fortunate to have her. I'm always tend to be the pitch hitter for somebody who can't come. I'm actually was going to participate, and then Marie, who was supposed to facilitate this panel, wasn't able to make it personally. I think she's on virtually. So you have me yet again doing somebody else's presentation. But that's okay, because this is a topic of my interest and concern, and the beauty of having a flooding panel during the wet season is that it's top of mind. We get out of this hotel and we walk around and we can see the impact of poor planning. So this is a very timely subject. Now, our challenge is now then to take it from this room and do something about it, because during the dry season, we tend not to think about it. So hopefully you think about some of the solutions that we can come up with today that we can actually implement. This was a panel, we'd had the same panel last year before COVID, and there was some recommendations from that panel that some people here worked and thought a lot about, and so we'll hear from the speakers about that. So our first speaker for today is going to be I've elevated you, but Captain Brian Bearden, and we've worked together a lot at GWA. He is a commissioned officer, and he will tell you he's not with the Navy, with the U.S. Public Health Service, detailed with the U.S. Environmental Protection, and currently assigned to Guam EPA. As a chief engineer, Captain Bearden oversees all activities of Guam EPA's Water Division. He's had over 30 years of experience and previously worked in the CNMI at the Bureau of Environmental and Coastal Quality and the Commonwealth Utility Corporation. And so Captain Bearden is going to be presenting on one of his recommendations.
Okay, so we have the slides ready to go here. So last year, right before COVID shut us down, we had come together as another panel with maybe a few different people, but some of the same people, and we presented the findings of a working group that had been put together through the facilitation of Bureau of Statistics and Plans, and also the Army Corps of Engineers folks that are here through this the Silver Jackets program. And so I'm just going to go real quickly through our findings to kind of give a recap for everybody to remind us where we were before we all had our attention diverted. So next slide, please. I've got a few standard slides here that I was asked by the AIA, the American Institute of Architecture, I believe, to present up here for continuing education. So maybe we could just skip through this slide to the next one and the next one. So this one, we'll put this up at the end of my talk. If anyone needs continuing education credits, there's the URL there, so you can, or the QR code, so that you can link on and take the required survey. I don't know if I need to say anything else more about that, so I'll just move on. So going into what we talked about last year, I present this typical scenario that we use as our example, and you could just go to the next slide. What we looked at as a prime example, and this has come up again even just in the last week with us at Guam EPA with permitting, where people get in and they develop one lot at a time, individual family homes. It falls under the radar of all of the Guam rules and regulations that exist right now. And as time wears on and more of these lots are developed one at a time, we begin to see cumulative impacts, and usually and often in terms of flooding in the lower spots. And our example last year was, as shown there, that you've got the people that live in the lower lots there, they get the worst of it, right? When they first built their house, they weren't flooding, but as everybody else built up around them, the floodwaters ended up impinging on their homes, and then eventually somebody, and you see with the red box around there, decides that they're going to take action, and then they put up a wall around their property, and then that pushes the floodwaters into the other homes. And it's a real problem, and I know that some of the mayors here, we've talked about this with you guys as well. So that's what we started off with at our example scenario to begin our discussion. If you guys could go to the next slide. So as the group convened as the Silver Jackets, a number of the agencies in Guam got together and we evaluated all of our laws and regulations and other policies and came up with a list of gaps. And here's just a very brief summary. We had a much more detailed summary last year, but I want to save more time for everybody else. So the major gaps include there are requirements to put in drainage systems, but they apply only to subdivisions. And a subdivision is classified as anything 5 lots and larger. And those regulations and rules do not apply to people coming in and developing a single lot at a time for individual family homes. We do have different requirements for commercial buildings and such. When you get to the individual family homes, though, there really aren't very many requirements. In fact, the regulations and laws are built in a way that exempts them, or at least gives the opportunity for the agencies to exempt the the single-family development from any kind of flood control, drainage design requirements. And in practice, since the very beginning of Guam EPA and DPW, I think, in the 70s, those exemptions have been applied. So it's culture almost by now. It's the culture of building homes in Guam that you don't put in ponding basins and such. Another major gap that we identified was that the rules right now in Guam apply almost solely to the permitting, subdivision, and construction process. And once something is constructed, there's nothing that really gives us that ability to go in after the fact and require the installation of stormwater controls or even the maintenance of stormwater controls that were built previously. The regulations are just focused on permitting requirements, basically. And then the last big gap that we discussed was, who is in charge, really? A lot of people seem to think it was Guam EPA. Some people think it's DPW. It's just not really clearly spelled out. From Guam EPA side, our statutes that set us up they talk very clearly about, our purpose is the control of pollution, not flooding. But DPW, on the other hand, they've got infrastructure and, who really is in charge of making sure that these problems are addressed? And that was one of the big gaps that we discussed. So next slide, please. So I lumped these into categories here. These are a very brief rundown of the recommendations that the committee had put together. But this year I've categorized them to make them maybe a little bit easier to understand. So I put them into 4 categories there. Requirements on developers, and that would include an individual who wants to build a home. Changes to the government review process for permits. Major policy changes such as laws that might be required, and then funding. So on the requirements for developers side, we had talked about density restrictions, and I'm going to focus on just 2 of these as I go on, just so we can get this over quickly. And one of them is going to be density restrictions as a way to, moving forward, to try to avoid these problems that we see with this cumulative impact. Impermeable area limits, that would be limiting the amount of a lot that can be turned into concrete or buildings and preserving that natural soil and vegetation surface. Low impact development standards as they apply to homes, and I'll give you an example of that in a couple of slides here. In addition to putting requirements in there for design standards for people who want to build fences and walls to make sure we're not knowingly permitting somebody pushing a flood into somebody else's home. Changes to the review process. We talked in great deal last year about ways to use modern technology in the permit review process. We've begun using an example of this at Guam EPA just in the last 2 months, where now all of our permitting is going through an electronic system. When a reviewer opens it up, it gives you a GIS map showing the permit site in relation to, for example, Guam Water Works sewer, Guam Water Works wells, and the 1,000-foot radius around the well, as well as depressed areas and wetlands where drainage might be an issue. And then how to apply that, right? And we talked last year about the possibility of DPW performing a drainage review for every lot as they're subdivided. That would involve looking at the percolation rate and the topography and where runoff from that lot would go. Pretty complex. None of these policy recommendations would be easy to implement. Almost all of them would be controversial to some extent, even to a great extent. And then getting into the kind of the bigger picture of things, some of the policy changes that the group had recommended was obviously designating which agency would be the lead flood control agency that would take this on as their main priority, so that we don't have this rainy season crisis where people are calling up the wrong agency potentially to respond to a flooding issue. And then finally, also changing the rules that we have in existence right now to allow the agencies to step in after a development is completed to retroactively require certain requirements to be met or to require maintenance to be done on-site drainage and stormwater systems. And finally, the biggest issue that we all have to acknowledge is that a lot of this, especially fixing existing flooding and drainage problems, it really boils down to funding. To fix these problems are often very major capital improvement type needs that cannot be met without massive amounts of funding. But there's also maintenance requirements that must be met as well. If, for example, the DPW or the mayor's offices are able to go out there and routinely keep these drainage systems clean, we reduce that risk of floods due to clogged inlets and clogged culverts, for example. So we talked last year about the possibility of killing two birds with one stone, so to speak, with the new, what they call the Municipal Separate Stormwater System Permit from the US EPA. We call that the MS4 permit for short. It's something that DPW is under a timeline for now to comply with. US Navy has also got one down for their facilities. And approaching this the way other jurisdictions have in the US mainland and even in Hawaii now, which was the establishment of a separate agency, a stormwater utility that handles that permit, handles the maintenance of these facilities, and has an independent funding mechanism, whether that's through property taxes, whether that's through some sort of service fee based on an impervious area of a lot, for example, to give that mechanism there so that there is a continuous funding mechanism to allow maintenance to occur and to even potentially build up some capital reserves to handle emergency situations. So next slide. So just like I said, I'm going to focus only on two of those recommendations right now as something that from Guam EPA's side, we see going forward could be the simpler items to implement, but maybe not without controversy. And one of those would be to restrict the density of new development. And this came up last year, as many of you are aware, with groundwater protection and septic systems. And in that case, we were talking about a density of about 1 home per half acre to limit the amount of impact we see on the groundwater. For stormwater, we haven't looked at a number of what that might be, but the principle behind this is that as people build, as people cumulatively develop land, they change the hydrology of the ground surface, water runs off, and these flooding problems become worse and worse. So limiting that density of new development to a certain density, whether that be 1 home per acre, whether it's 2 homes per acre, 1 home per 2 acre, who knows, we would have to do the work on that. That's a way to mitigate that problem as we move forward without major infrastructure being built. And that would come with an ability to get out of that requirement, right? So if someone is able to then come in and put in infrastructure to handle drainage, sewer infrastructure to eliminate the risks of groundwater from septic systems, then you could reduce that density or increase the density, I guess, and have more homes per acre. Next slide. And then I wanted to throw this up here. This is an example we have, and these have not been required for individual family homes, but maybe it's something we want to start requiring. This is straight out of the 2006 CNMI and Guam Stormwater Management Manual, which I was the project manager for that manual way back in 2003 or so. I was up here in Guam at the time from CNMI working with Guam EPA to make sure that we had something that worked for both CNMI and Guam. But back in the back of this manual, it's got this chapter on how you can apply low impact development principles to a single family home. And as you can see there, it applies, it's not really an engineering function here. This would not handle the full 25-year storm like a commercial development would be required to, but it would reduce some of the impacts from single family homes as they go in terms of both water quantity and water quality. And just to point out a few of those features that are on there, the driveway is replaced with permeable pavement so that that's no longer an impervious surface. It shows the use of what we call dry swales in the front, which serve the purpose of providing drainage for the access roads to the homes, but also infiltrate some water and get that off the road and keep it from flooding. The rooftop drains are connected in this case to an underground sort of a stone cistern that allows that water to infiltrate into the ground. That may or may not be possible on a lot of lots. If you've got a septic system on your lot as well, that may just interfere with that septic system. So not all of this would be applicable. And then in addition, we've got a rain garden there, which is sort of a miniature, what we call biofiltration, bioretention BMP. It's sort of a landscaping feature. People can plant flowers in it, but it also takes care of some of that stormwater, infiltrates it more rapidly, and provides some treatment. And next slide, I think that is the end for me, and I will sit down and.
Is Senator Perez or one of her staff here? I just don't want to, she was on the panel. Okay. Well, whenever she comes, we'll just invite her up. Our next speaker will be Vince Ariola. I too worked for him for a long time. He has a lot of legislative and executive branch experience. He was the Deputy Director of Department of Administration He was the executive director for the Guam legislature. He was the director of the Beer Planning when it was called the Beer Planning. And he used to be the general manager of Guam Telephone Authority when it was in the process of getting privatized. And so his presentation will be about what Brian just spoke about, MS4. Maybe you can tell us more about it. So thank you, Vince.
Thank you, Vanjie. Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about flooding and storm drains and how the two of them interact together. You know, when I first got appointed to the Department of Public Works, I was very excited. I still am very excited. There's so much work to do, and it's a great job to have because you get to build things, you get to fix things, you get to improve a lot of things. Until I got immersed in the work there, and I found out that the work is basically a flood of work. And the amount of people we have, back in the day, I understand, when I first took a tour of the department, I did a walk around the campus, and I said, "Where is everybody?" They said, "Sir, at one point we had 1,100 people here. Today we have 260. So that gives you an idea of what we're faced with. At the same time, you know, the work keeps piling up. And this is one issue that came before us, MS4, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. This came up as soon as I got there. What is MS4? Next slide, please. It's, like we said, it's the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System. Municipal, of course, it's government owned, it's publicly owned. The separate part of it is it doesn't connect to the sanitary sewer system and doesn't lead to any wastewater treatment plan. I need to focus on that. It's an independent system. Unfortunately, we've had some illegal, if not incorrect connections. We've seen houses connected to the sewer system. Instead of the sewer system, it's connected to the storm sewer system, the storm drain system. And conversely, we've had residential sewer systems that are connected to the storm drain system. So we're still dealing with that. In terms of the storm sewer system, that includes our drains. You'll see them all along Marine Drive, inlets, ditches, gutters. And what we're trying to do is we're taking the storm water basically from the rain and taking it from one place to another. The last maintenance, my understanding, the last maintenance of any of our storm drains, any of our inlets, our outlets, was basically never. So we are faced with a major issue that we have to deal with. Little bit of background. Next slide, please. The National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, it's federally mandated. Back in 2018, the federal EPA issued us a permit that expires in 2024. Part of this permit, the initial part of the permit, basically requires DPW to create a comprehensive stormwater management system and a management program that aims to improve the water quality being discharged into the ocean or into certain ponding basins. Next slide, please. Okay. Next slide, please. What we have here, this is the Fujita ponding basin. And again, this is just one sample of part of our MS4 system down in Tumon. One of the things that we've been doing, especially down in Tumon, when I first got on board, there were three major areas that I saw as major flooding areas. One was certainly in Tumon. The next major flooding area was down in Sumay, the Polaris Point area. As you folks may know, we've had to close several lanes simply because it was impassable. And then the third flooded area that I believe was very important and very serious was the one down in the Malesso area around the Barcenas family area, the Manel Channel. So my immediate goal was to do a maintenance so that out of these three areas, if we can do as much maintenance as we can in clearing, that the next rainy seasons, we don't have any major flooding areas. We believe we've cleared out the storm drains and the outlets in Polaris. We've done a pretty good job in Tumon, and Malesso is just a matter of cleaning out the debris as it comes down from the mountain. But again, this is part of our MS4 system. Next slide, system, please. Right here, you've got some pictures of some outlets. What I really want to focus on here is that in order for it to be functioning properly and well-maintained, it has to be free and clear of debris, silt, and things of that nature. Storm drains with silt, rocks, and other debris basically contribute to the flooding issue. If it doesn't leave the storm drain system, water's gonna find its destination wherever it wants. It's gonna go where it wants to go. Next slide, please. So these are some of the, as part of the permit, these are some of the minimum control measures that we are required to do. Next slide, please. First one, of course, is public education and outreach. Part of our plan is we're going to go out to the schools, we're going to go out to the community. We've got to educate folks about the entire stormwater system here on Guam, what it means, what it's about, where it's located throughout the island, what the importance is of a stormwater drainage system, and the like. Part of this also includes landscape contractors, major hotels in the Tumon area, and a lot of the commercial businesses in the Harmon industrial area. Next slide, please. Again, another issue is public involvement, public participation. I'm going to lean on and require the assistance of all our island mayors throughout all the villages. They have direct contact with their village residents. We'll talk to them about the rivers, the outfalls, the inlets, what the importance is of having a functioning, efficient, and clean MS4 system. Next slide, please. Part of the permit also requires us to deal with illicit discharge detection and elimination, IDDE. What you have here in the slide before that, there you go. You've got some storm inlets, some storm drains. What should not be going in there are leaves, cut grass, trash. We know in the Tumon, right here along Tumon, we started some storm drain cleaning, I believe in 2019, actually. And what was found in there was silt, tiles, concrete, some furniture was inside there, construction waste, things of that nature. Again, the clear majority of our stormwater drains have never been maintained, have never been cleaned. And so when we came into Tumon, as I mentioned, Tumon, Malesso, and Polaris Point, those were my three headache areas to try to clean out and make sure that we don't have additional flooding. Again, the deal here was with our stormwater inlets and drains. It's for storm water only. It's for rainwater. It's not a place to dump your trash, construction waste, things of that nature, because once it goes in there, it's got to either find a way out or it's going to get stuck. I brought my red bag. There it is. I know you folks were probably saying Vincent's probably going to give cookies to Tyrone. No, he doesn't need it. Actually, Tyrone's an old classmate of mine. What you have here, this is a rock formation that we found in Assen. It was part of a storm drain. This is about 1% of what we found. It was a huge rock formation, just made from the water in a storm drain that Waterworks assisted us in clearing. So what happened when we opened the storm drain? They cut open the storm drain, and inside were two hollow blocks, just sitting there in the storm drain. And they'd been there for so long that as the water was passing, it kept building up and building up and building up, and eventually this huge formation blocked about 95% of the stormwater drain, and that caused flooding uphill and throughout the system. So again, this is the kind of stuff we're going to have to deal with, and I'm almost positive this is the only instance. Okay, next slide, please. We also have to deal with construction site runoff control. Right here, this is the result of not having adequate ponding basins within a construction site. This is fairly recent. What happened? The ponding basins weren't operable. They were inadequate, and when it went off the property line, this went on to private property. This is actually a picture of private property where you could see the water runoff. And we estimate at the time this was flowing, it was probably easy 2 to 3 feet of raging water. Okay, and then finally, part of our permit is we've got to do post-construction site runoff management. And the slides you see here, next slide you see here is taking advantage of some of the green space, landscaping. There's drainage there, and this is the proper way to do it. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we have to have prevention. We have to have good maintenance. We have to have good housekeeping, and that's going to be on us. Not just DPW though. This is an island-wide effort. Again, like I mentioned earlier, we cannot have trash. We can't have litter. We can't have construction materials. As easy as it is, the drain is there. You kind of just throw things in there. That can't be. As we the next slide, I'll talk about what are some of the consequences. But it's real simple. In order to reduce some of our flooding within our roadway, we have to have a clean and clear stormwater drain system. It's very simple. If you see certain areas that flood along Marine Drive, even if there's a drain system there, it's probably because it's clogged up and it's not clean underneath. So some of our DPW plans, next slide, please. We are looking to establish a standalone division to oversee the MS4 program. We were fortunate enough from our federal highway partners in Honolulu. They are willing to fund an administrator position for this division, and it makes sense. We convince them because the more the roads flood, it deteriorates the roads. So to start off, we've got the okay to hire an administrator to basically start out this division from scratch and build it up to be as efficient as possible. We of course need the legal authority to implement the program, to cite individuals, to give fines as necessary, and then also to conduct a full assessment of our MS4 system. We've done pretty much we're at about the 90% stage. We've identified 400 inlets. Those are the drains, outfalls, 12 miles of stormwater piping, and so on and so forth. So part of this plan will also involve equipment and administrator and so on and so forth. Right now, the program is unfunded, but we do have some ARP funding coming in. We've got some grants that we're going to be going after, and hopefully we can get to the bottom of this and have a clean and efficient stormwater system and a nice working MS4 system. That's all I have. Thank you so much. Keep on clean.
Thank you. Before you leave, have you mapped all of your stormwater system? The entire. Do you have maps already of your entire system?
Yes, we've got about 90% of our stormwater system mapped out. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to coordinate that with the sewer system that GWA has, because a lot of folks, they dig, they see a pipe and they think, okay, that's a sewer system, and it's not. So there's going to have to be a lot of coordination between ourselves and GWA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vince. I think we're going to go through all the panels and then we can stop for questions. So, Senator, our next speaker will be Senator Sabina Perez. She's a member of the 36th Guam Legislature. She's the chairperson, she's a majority whip and the chairperson on the Committee of Environment, Revenue and Taxation, Labor Procurement, I'm sorry, what am I missing? And Statistics. So Senator Perez.
Good morning, everyone. I apologize for being a little late. We're in the middle of budget talks. I'll be also rushing off to resume that. So I really am glad that I came after Director Ariola. I think it's amazing the progress or at least the plans that are that they're going to do. So if we can go to the next slide. So what I want to bring to the conversation is, the idea of thinking in watersheds. I think that's more of a holistic way of approaching the flooding issue. And I want to also maybe rethink our watersheds when it comes to traditional uses. So this concept of Ahupua'a land use system is in Hawaii. And this really resonated with me because of that holistic approach. And so in traditional way of using their land, they really worked in harmony with nature. And they utilized it in a way that sustained them also. From the highlands to the coastal areas was interconnected. They saw it as one interconnected resource. And this is something I hope that we can maybe bring back to Guam or bring to Guam, but obviously apply it in a different way. So yeah, the way the system is that they acknowledge their place in nature. They honored and respected that. And it also provided for their sustainability. Next slide, please. And so when we look at Guam, Guam, when you think about Guam, it's almost like two islands put together. The north is limestone, predominantly limestone, so that's why you have the infiltration of water and producing groundwater. And then so here is a picture of the Northern Guam. And when you look at it, originally, native Chamorros, we didn't. We live near our water sources, so there was discharge of water in the coastal areas, in the springs. That's where most of our habitats were. But now with modern technology, we can now drill and pump up, lots of water, millions of gallons of water a day. But this map is this picture is taken from Weary. A lot of the pictures were taken from Weary, and so they did identify, 6 underground basins, so you can almost think of them as watersheds. And so that's one thing how, when we're thinking about going back to the idea of looking at our resource in watersheds, this is one thing we can apply to that. Next slide. So one of the features that are very important is the sinkholes, and sinkholes can be seen as almost a direct pathway of water to our aquifer. And these are areas that really need to be protected. And when we think about trying to revive that idea of thinking in watersheds, how can we protect this resource? Next slide. So as I said, Guam is almost like two islands put together. The south is predominantly clay soil, and therefore the water doesn't infiltrate as easily, and therefore you see most of our rivers are there, over 100 rivers. And so you have that typical, stereotypical idea of a watershed, and all the challenges that come with that as well, because topography is a little bit more varied. There's a little more issues of erosion relating to we don't manage the land properly. And again, this picture again in the middle is a division of the different watersheds in the south. And just to kind of give you an idea, the amount of water that falls in the north, we always look to the north as our source of water. The south gets equally the same amount, but it's so much easier to develop the north than the south when it comes to water generation. And next slide. So previous 2 slides. I think there was a previous slide, yeah. So I believe this slide was covered originally from one of the speakers today, and in the last meeting, there were some major gaps in regards to, what is the cause of flooding. And again, I think really this ties back to this idea that we are not looking in a holistic manner of the watershed that we're living in. And so we piecemeal development, right? One house at a time. And, if we try to, if we want to change this, I think it's really important to implement more of a holistic approach when it comes to planning, when it comes to implementation of projects. Okay, and then there were other issues that I'll go into a little bit more. Next slide. So, sorry about the second one, but basically, so my goal or my role here was to look at some of the laws and see, where the opportunities for change. So these are just some of the laws that or regulations that were implemented, that pertains to stormwater. One is the Subdivision Law, and in looking at that, these laws in our books are pretty old. You can tell because some of the fees are like $10, right? $10 for an application. And I think that's we can probably get there's like a coffee. If you get a really good coffee, it's $10, right? So I think a lot of these things are outdated. So in looking at these laws, I definitely see opportunities to implement this idea of holistic planning, requiring holistic plans into what is being proposed by developers. And of course, this is going to require some sort of buy-in and a lot of conversation, right? Just to make a change such as drastic as this, or a huge change, which I think is really the direction we need to go in. It's going to definitely require a lot of community conversations to do this. But I think it's what is needed. The other things is enforcement. So when looking at the subdivision law, the enforcement aspect, it's a violation. There's no fines. Who is going to be implementing this? So that's areas that need to be addressed. And I'm really glad Director Ariola had mentioned about DPW actually taking the lead. So knowing that could be useful information when we're amending laws, to see who is going to be the enforcer. And also, with like Guam EPA, they have the ability to cite people on their own. They have the administrative authority. This is something that is missing from this particular law. You'd have to go through the courts, and everybody knows, or a lot of people have experience when they're enforcing environmental actions. It's very difficult to enforce it through the courts because of scheduling issues. And there's just a huge workload in the courts right now, which prioritizes criminals, right? Criminal law, criminal cases. And again, there's other things like the stormwater manual. So we're currently in Guam, there's 2 manuals for stormwater. So what are the gaps between those? I think that needs to be, and do we need to have one particular manual that addresses all? And perhaps the application for an MS4 permit might help alleviate that one or address that issue. If we're having 2 different regulations, there potentially is conflict. But if we're going to harmonize everything under the MS4 permits, that might address it. Again, funding. So there's something in law that has a fund, creates a fund. It's called the Guam Ocean Fisheries Conservation Fund. And that's designed to, whatever monies that come through it, through grants, donations, other funding, can be used towards protection of the coastal waters. And so again, as we know, a lot of the stormwater, whatever pollutants they carry, end up in the ocean. And so this particular funding source, if it should be used, that's potential funding as well. Next slide. Flood prevention. So this was presented in the last planners meeting. I think incentivizing low impact development standards are really, I really would promote and advocate for something like that, bioswales. But basically, if you think about a lot of the development, it's designed to move water quickly away from the site. That's the regime that we're under. And, perhaps thinking about how we can develop things so that we're not really changing the hydrogeologic nature of that site. I mean, I think we need to look more into those ways. And there's a lot of creativity that can come from it. I mean, if you think about a lot of the designs that you see in other countries, it's exciting to see how a building is built around a rock or a natural feature, right? It adds to the, the beauty of it. And I think this is something that, perhaps there's a lot of room for improvement in those areas, really to challenge ourselves as a community to embrace these features and to work around these features. It adds a lot of value. I know there was been mention about, setting a fee for impervious surfaces. I know they do this in Florida. There's like a $5 fee for every 1,500 square feet of impervious surface as a way to potentially fund a stormwater utility program. So this is some of the things that can be brought to the table as far as discussion is concerned, because this does require some sort of funding, and yes, there are federal grants out there, but perhaps what is the proper source? What is the most acceptable source for funding to ensure that these stormwater drains are clear, which is a huge part of the problem of flooding in these developed areas. And of course, mapping. So again, I think this also can tie into this concept, or this thinking in terms of watersheds. I think there's a lot that can be done to map our watersheds. There's a lot of technology out there to really know what areas are prone to flooding. If you develop it a certain way, would it exacerbate the situation? How would it change the hydrology of that site and of the area? And I think there's a lot of tools out there that have yet to be utilized to its fullest extent. And I definitely would like to promote and advocate for these very, it's almost like low-hanging fruit is what I call them. They're the preventive measures. I really would advocate for more of the preventive measures when it comes to flooding. Next slide. Okay, flooding for post-development. I think, again, that's where the law is in need of change, because a lot of the flooding requirements are in the plans and in construction, but there's nothing after that really addresses the evaluation of the site after it's been built, right? And if you build one building after another, then of course, we don't have that mechanism in place to really address these things. And I think my time is almost up. So, but again, yeah, this is something that could be added into law. Next slide. This slide is basically showcasing that there are a lot of, like what I said earlier, how we can map our different watersheds, soil type, drainage, topography, down rainfall, the amount of rainfall. I think with climate change, the expectation is that we're going to get intense rainfall events. And so this is what we need. We need to figure out a way how we're going to adapt to this. And again, I think, when we think about flooding, we think water is a liability, but water truly is a resource. And we need to kind of switch that paradigm, that maybe perhaps we can, capture as much of this water for potential, positive beneficial uses. How can we do this? I think that's maybe the direction we need to go in, is rather than thinking of it as a liability, thinking of it as a resource. Next slide. So I just want to share with you the U.S. Congress passed an infrastructure bill, and there's opportunities for funding in case you may not be aware. So there's certain sections within the highway. There's certain amounts of monies for highway, and I'm wondering if Director Ariola are already looking into that. But there is money to be had for territories, and this could also be a part of the stormwater flooding prevention. The other part I want to also key in is the clean water infrastructure resiliency. And I think this, when I read this, it looks more like it applies to GWA. So we'll definitely be having more conversations about that, but it's definitely tied to a lot of these ideas of green infrastructure, protecting watersheds, that sort of thing. But it's, I think it's more directed towards GWA. The last item also includes funding for, so the US wants to fund 3 or 4 centers of excellence when it comes to stormwater management and technologies, promoting certain technologies. And I just want to put it out there, can Guam be one of them? If we can, showcase what technologies we can produce to help with stormwater management. So that ends my talk. Masi.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our, hang in there. We have two more speakers and then we can get to some of your questions. So our next speaker is going to, is Randy Romero. He is with the Department of Public Works. He is a flood administrator. He works with the building inspector, inspections, permits, and a section at the permits administration section of DPW. Prior to coming to DPW, he was working with the Department of Education as a program coordinator, doing 15 years and in charge of all the CIP projects. So, Randy, do you have a presentation for us? Great. He's going to be talking about something that many people in building are waiting for, which is the updated firm maps. Or the flood insurance policies, right? Hey, Randy.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Just to let you know that I've been at DPW only for 5 months, and there was a lot to absorb with my position, and as a permits administrator and also as a floodplains administrator. So, can you go to the next slide? So, for this presentation, it's just explaining the duties of the floodplain administrator. So, the administrator is responsible for implementing the community's local floodplain ordinance and ensuring that the community is complying with the NFIP standards and enforcing any locally imposed higher standards, and is also responsible for reviewing building permits to identify flood zone designation of the properties. Next slide. So, this is the defined areas of responsibilities that the floodplain administrator is involved in when reviewing all permits. So, yeah, sorry guys, I'm nervous up here. So, what a lot of people don't understand when they submit in their permits is that we do an initial review to see if that particular property is within that flood zone. When it is identified in that flood zone, what we do is we notify the contractor and the owner of the property for them to provide an elevation certificate. Once that is submitted, then what we do is we go ahead and we push the permit through its appropriate process. And in the meantime, we ask if it wasn't provided initially, we ask the contractor and the owner to have the design firm stand by for revisions of their design to incorporate any new elevation due to the elevation certification. Because in most cases, there is changes in the structure, the design structure, and the elevation. Next slide. So a special flood hazard area is an area having special flood mud flow or flood-related erosion hazards, and shown on a flood hazard boundary map or a flood insurance rate map firm. There's several identifications of identifying the flood. There's Zone A, AO, A1-A30, and so on. In most cases, when we do receive a permit, they're typically on Zone X, right? So that's a non-flood issue area. But most of our issues are properties along the coastline, starting from Tumon all the way down to Ipan. So basically the whole island towards the coastline is a potential red flag for us when we do see a permit. Okay, next slide. So this is the proposed flood development review process that I'm actually going to develop and implement within the next month or two. So this is going to be somewhat of a combination of what we're doing now, with more focus on the flood flood identification much early on and towards the end prior to permit issuance. So we want to make sure that we get everything ready before construction begins, because it's going to be severely costly for the owner to find out later on that his area is located in the flood zone and he has to elevate his house another 12 inches to 15 feet, right? So we want to do our due diligence and identify that so we don't unnecessarily impact the homeowner. So early on, that homeowner can decide whether he wants to proceed with the construction or not. Okay, next slide. So part of the previous slide in this is implementing with our current permit process. So at this time on intake, we actually review the permits very carefully, look at the property, the lot number, and identify it on the Guam GIS system and compare it to the FEMA firm maps. So as you can see, this is an extensive processing of a permit that goes through several regulatory agencies. All right, so next slide. So, okay. FEMA's high-risk flood zones, those that make up the SFHA, are those that begin with the letters A or V. Homeowners located in A or V zones are required to purchase flood insurance if they have a mortgage from a federally backed or federally regulated lender. FEMA's low and moderate risk flood zones, those outside the SFHA, are those that begin with the letters X, B, or C. Flood insurance is not required with these zones. So a couple of times I came across a property that is half in a flood zone and half in an X zone. So that's a unique situation that's very difficult to work with the property owner, especially if the property is only a certain size, because we have to take in consideration of setbacks around the property. So in that case, when it's identified, we actually, of course, require a flood certificate for that portion of the property and require that the design of the home be changed to ensure that elevation is met for the safety of that home and the homeowner. Next slide. So everybody is familiar with these pictures, with this picture. It's like every storm that we have. This is a home in Yamatic. And if you look at the lower portion is actually the format that I actually have to go in and really pinpoint that property of where it's at to make sure that if it's really identified in that flood zone. For this particular case, if you see that red pin on there, that's the actual location of that house. Now it takes a lot of, I have to actually open up three different programs just to pinpoint the property, which is sometimes very difficult. I use a FEMA firm map to look at the overview. I use the Guam GIS to pinpoint the property number. Then I have to use Google Earth to pin that property and compare it to the FEMA firm just to make sure I get that pin in the correct place. Because I don't want to unnecessarily burden somebody, requiring them to get a flood certificate when their property is not on a flood zone. Next slide. So here was a particular project in Riso, which is just recent. This person wanted to build a home right next to the shoreline in Mariso. This is closer towards Umatic Billy Bay. So he wasn't aware that he was required to get a flood zone certificate, or that he was in an actual flood zone, because he thought his property was a high enough elevation. But if you see this firm map, it shows coastal inundation that goes past his property and past his development. So we worked with him and his designer and his contractor. He got the flood certificate, and he had to actually elevate his house additional 3 feet just to be in compliance with the floodplain, and also for him to secure insurance. Because if he's not in compliance, he cannot secure insurance for, probably won't even get a mortgage for it, right? So yeah, so right below that picture, I always wondered what the 100-year floodplain is. I've always seen it on the firm map. Couldn't figure it out until I found this slide in one of my trainings that I took a month ago. So the bottom shows, explains the 100-year floodplain on that event, right? So, okay, next. Here's another property in Agate. Like I said, a lot of the areas that are identified are in the coastal areas. And this is another example, like I said earlier, that we worked with the property owner to make sure they get their certificate. All right, next, I'll just try to finish these slides. Now, the series of these slides will identify the zone letterings and what they actually mean. Okay, so there's several different types of classification, and I don't think I have time to go through it. Okay, next. Okay, so again, there's limitations. There are limitations of the FEMA maps. I think the last update was in, if I'm not mistaken, 2007. So I'm pretty sure that there are going to be changes to be done, and possibly a lot of the identified flood areas will probably expand even wider. So we're waiting for that update to occur. Okay, next slide, and I think that's it. Okay, here's a picture of Agana. Everybody thinks, it's a nice sunny day and no flood will ever happen here. Next slide. And here it shows you the coastal inundation. So looks can be deceiving, and if you're going to decide to build something, it's best to make sure that you build your house correctly and go through the proper permitting process so we can identify if your area is in a flood zone. Okay, next, I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Randy. I'm sorry, really running out of time though. I'll call up our next speaker, which is Leo, and we worked a long time with Leo, and he he's with the Guam Homeland Security and is the Guam State Hazardous Mitigation Officer. Thank you, Leo.
Thank you, Banji. So Banji whispered to me, we are running out of time, so she's giving me 30 seconds. Can I have one minute? Anyway, I'm happy that I'm seeing some of you that were already on board reviewing the notice of funding opportunities that was sent out by FEMA. And I'm also happy seeing a few of you that are already on board in the series of webinars. So I'm tasked to quickly go over the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program. So as your state hazard mitigation officer, I manage the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program of FEMA. And also I coordinate the hazard mitigation planning. So quickly, FEMA Hazard Mitigation Assistance Grant Programs provide funding for eligible activities that reduce and eliminate long-term risk to people and property for future disasters. And there are 4 components I'm going to mention here. One is the Hazard Mitigation Grants Program, which is disaster related. The HMGP provides funding to the jurisdictions so we can build in a way that reduces or mitigates future natural disaster losses in our communities. So the reference for this is Section 404 of the Stafford Act. Next is the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program post-fire, and we don't have this for the past 20 years. We're lucky we don't have that wildfire that bothers the continental U.S. So the HMGP post-fire program provides funding to help communities implement hazard mitigation measures focused on reducing the risk of harm from wildfire. And it is also authorized under sections 404 and 420 of the Stafford Act. Notably, there's no need for the presidential declaration for this kind of, to activate the funding. But there is a need for a farm management assistance grant declaration. The next grant that I'm going to talk about is the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, or the Brit, which most of you are now familiar with. So for fiscal year 2020, FEMA implemented the BRIC as a competitive grant program, which supported jurisdictions as we implement hazard mitigation projects to reduce the risk of disasters from natural hazards. So BRIC replaced FEMA's legacy pre-disaster mitigation program, or PDM, as you know it. That was FY 2020 is our first year of the BRIC program. I have a good news for you later on. And then the next grant that I'm going to talk about is the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, or FMA. And this is the grant that provides funding to the jurisdictions to mitigate flood damaged properties with the goal of reducing or eliminating claims under the National Flood Insurance Program, which Randy is overseeing. It is authorized by Section 1366 of the National Flood Insurance Act of 1968. So the pre-disaster mitigation program is replaced with the BRIC. And for you, most of you must have received already the notice of funding opportunities that was sent out by FEMA for both the BRIC and FMA. Okay, and the funding application is open since September 30, and it's gonna be for Guam. This is for Guam. Please take note that it has to be, the due date for sub-applications to us will be 30 days prior to the deadline of FEMA, which is January 28. So that means we're going to be working together during the holiday. So for us, it's December 28. It will give us a month to process all this and for the governor to bless which one would be sent to FEMA. So good news, okay. For the FY 2020 BRIC program, the first BRIC program that we have packaged 15 sub-applications with a total amount of 36 million. And 2 weeks ago and last week, I received some confirmation of some sub-applications that are approved and are funded. And I have to make mention, BSP, you really did a good job in packaging the 4 applications that you have there, and kudos to the team of Lola and Edwin and Audrey Menes, most especially, who worked with me. So out of the 4, 1 is confirmed, approved, and funded. So pending all the other RFIs that we need to address with FEMA, those of you that are lucky would be receiving a sub-award and letter from the Office of the Governor. And for those who are not lucky, because it's competitive and there's so much, there's a lot of money, but there's only so much, it's so many sub-applications, applications from the states and territories. Be ready to take a look at what you got, because I would be requesting you to upload again in the 2021. So I'm now working with FEMA on the review documents so that we will know if there's some kind of loopholes with the packaging that we have. The other announcement that I got is for the Hazard Mitigation Grants Program, okay, for COVID-19, Guam is likely to have about over 6 million for hazard mitigation grants program. So that is really something that we need to take a look at. So question, is that for public health, medical kind of mitigation project? The answer is no. You can hire the infrastructure using that funding. So I will be here until the second day. Pull me on the side if you are interested. But the question would be, how am I going to apply? The application process in Guam is via the notice of interest process, okay? You're gonna be filling out the form, you're gonna be submitting it to us, you're gonna be giving us the synopsis of your project, the cost estimate, and all the other data that we need. And then we will work from there. We'll workshop one-on-one, make sure that you have a solid grant application before the Guam deadline, which is December 28th. Okay, so I'm seeing a question in the audience. Sir, it's not, there's gonna be an announcement coming from the Office of the Governor. Yeah. We have to deal with the RFIs from FEMA. And I'd like to acknowledge the Director of Mitigation from FEMA Region 9, Kaiti Lipeki, and the Director of Recovery Division, Robert Pasaping, and of course our big sister, Director of Readiness from Pacific Area Office, Colby Stanton. And of course, we have a FEMA integrated team in Guam. They are Lori Willis and then Chuck Ada.